We're live. It's 7:03. You know how we do it. How's everybody doing? Tonight we're going to talk about turbo miss. I'm working on a video, and it actually would have already been up today, but apparently in my trip back to Ohio, actually sometime coming back, I seem to have lost my jump drive. It allows me to transfer the video that I do on my computer to my phone, which is where I do my editing. So now I can't do that. So I wasn't able to put the video up. But we're going to talk about turbo miss because my video is on the my top 5 turbo miss. And one of them is debatable. So it'll be interesting. But what I wanted to hear from you guys is, what are your turbo miss? What do you guys think that people tout all the time? Like, for instance, one of them is you have to run low compression with a turbo. We know everybody does that. If you look at any of the many turbo books that you have, they'll tell you, oh, you got to run those 8-to-1 or 7.5, even 7.5-to-1 back in the day for those small block Chevys and stuff. Got to run the turbo pistons, big old giant dish. If you go way back to 1976, when Porsche introduced the turbo in the United States, and in I think it was the 930 here, but it was a turbo there, maybe the Turbo Carrera, I think here, if I remember right. 3-liter non-intercooled 6.5-to-1 compression. You might be wondering why on earth would it be that low? Well, air-cooled, no intercooled, not very high octane because this was in the mid 70s at the height of the oil crisis and stuff. And they probably figured that guys would be running it because this is a German car. They had Autobahns that were unrestricted, especially back then. Guys might be running this like flat out for a long period of time. And so they didn't have sophisticated electronics. What they wanted to do was make sure that they're air cooled, not notorious for, cooling over long periods of time, long loads over a long time. They wanted to make sure that this thing was going to be safe. And that's the way that they did it back then. Fast forward a number of years. If you look at most of the factory, forced induction deals, whether it had a centrifugal supercharger or a root supercharger, twin screw, turbo, whatever it was, if you look at any of the factory stuff, almost all of them were low compression. The Dodge Omni is a perfect example. We had stuff that was like compression was in the 8s, low 8s in the case of the Omni. Excuse me, but 7.5, 8-to-1, 8.5. That seemed to kind of be the sweet spot for a lot of the factory forced induction things. And like I said, early on, maybe rightly so, because having real sophisticated knock detection, which the Omni did, it relied on a knock detector fairly heavily. Dodge did on those 2.2s. But, it was still in its infancy in the mid 80s. And now we have things, and they, when they started out, like with my Omni GLH Turbo, it was non-intercooled. So, having the safety of an intercooler, and then I remember reading the thing on either Allpar, Mini Mopars, or one of those, about when they were interviewing one of the engineers and him saying that he won a battle in putting something in the owner's manual that it's highly recommended that you run premium fuel in this for optimum performance, because then the knock sensor wouldn't take timing away and wouldn't lower the performance if you were trying to run it, which we all do. Lots of people are guilty of that, running 87 octane. I know I run 87 in my truck. It would run better probably if I had 91, especially if I was towing, but I run 87 in it, but it's not a turbo motor. But a lot of guys will do that. They'll put regular gas in it because it's available and it's cheaper. When you pull into a gas station, you look at it, you go, I want the stuff that's the least expensive. That's the lowest octane. That's what I'll put in there, even though it will run better on 91 or 93, which people have in other parts in the United States, which is awesome. So the question is, do we need the low compression to, does that have to go with a turbo application? Do you have to have low compression for a turbo? And my argument is no, that you don't. But it does widen the tune window. It gives you more of a safety margin. And when you start looking at higher compression stuff, which we run high compression with turbo stuff all the time, racers even more so. They run ultra high compressions with turbo stuff because in a racing application, you're trying to get all the power that you can out of the combination. This is especially true in class applications where they're limited by turbo size, so you don't have an unlimited amount of boost. They're limited in what the turbo will do, so they have to make efficiencies in other areas, and static compression is one of those things. Static compression also helps with boost response because anything that improves the power output of the naturally aspirated motor helps with boost response. So if you need or want more boost response, that's a good way to get it. But when you do that, when you run higher compression, I'm not talking about the 12, 13, 14 to 1 stuff that they use in race cars. I'm talking about going up from the 7, 8 range up into the 9, 10 range, which would kind of be normal for most naturally aspirated street stuff. And we see that all the time. And my argument in the video is that we go to the wrecking yard and get these motors that are certainly over 9 to 1, 9.5. The L28 Nissan is another example of it being being a low compression, non-intercooled, ultra safe, 80s kind of technology. But if we go to the wrecking yard and we get an LS, we get something that's in the low 9s, mid 9s, high 9s, 10, over 10. In the case of LS3 stuff, going up near 11 to 1, and we run boost on those. Now, my argument was in the video, and you guys will be seeing that when it comes out, but my argument is that if you're going to do that, it's certainly possible. You don't have to run 8 to 1 compression with a turbo application. When you're doing that, as I said, the tuning window gets smaller. So your safety margin is pretty tight. You want to make sure, meaning that you want to make sure that you do everything right. So there's a combination of stuff that you have to run when you're running a force induction application. So you have to run some level of boost. You get to choose what that is. You're combining that with some static compression. You're also combining that with some dynamic compression. The dynamic compression guys that like to talk about the cam timing and the static compression, the combination there. There's lots of other things because they think that that's the ultimate thing. Oh, but what's your dynamic compression? That's really the key to all this. No, it's one thing. Just like intercooling is, just like octane is, just like boost is, just like timing is, all the things. So you have to combine all of the things into this boost soup, as it were. So you have to run the right kind of octane. Normally we don't run 87 octane on our turbo motors. I don't, and you should run 91. You should run premium. I know it's more expensive, but you have a turbo car, you should treat it right. So you should run whatever octane you can. E85 is even better because you have cooling from the alcohol, and then you also have higher octane, both of which are great for a turbo motor. So you have to run boost, static compression, octane, extra cooling in the case of the like E85. Intercooling, again, charge cooling helps eliminate detonation. A lot of things that guys are thinking about the air going into the turbo. Why would you ingest 200-degree air to then cool it off with an intercooler? You need to ingest into the turbo ambient air, not drawing air from right behind the radiator that is now blowing whatever temperature that your motor is running at, somewhere near 200 degrees. Why would you grab that air? All the oxygen molecules have already been taken out of that air. You don't want that air. You want good air. So ambient air, intercooling, a reasonable amount of static compression, a reasonable amount of dynamic compression, and you could make an argument about dynamic compression. You could say, well, I might be able to run more with wilder cam timing, which you certainly will. But the thing is, here's the other side of that equation, is that let's say that you're running a stock camshaft and you're running 9 to 1, 9.2 to 3, 4, whatever to 1, static compression ratio. And then you put a wilder cam timing in it that's going to lower your dynamic compression. But the thing is, at the same boost level, it's going to make a lot more power. So your cylinder pressure is higher. So which one of those has more of an effect on the detonation threshold? Is it the greater cylinder pressure? Is it the dynamic compression? Is it the drop in that or the increase in cylinder pressure? What is that? The other things that affect it, your chamber shape, the surface finish of the chamber, the softening of the chamber, the piston design, where the piston is relative to the deck surface, all of these things, what the water temperature is, what the coolant temperature is, what temperature are you running that motor at. All of those things come into play and will help determine the detonation threshold, and then subsequently what static compression ratio you would need to run to ward off all of these other potential demons. So the lower the compression is, the more mistakes that you can run or that you can make with all of these other things. You can run more air inlet temperature. You can have a less efficient intercooler or no intercooler. You can run more or less octane and cooling, all of these things. So as you tailor the static compression, it gives you, like I said, it gives you the tuning window. And when I say tuning window, it's not just air, fuel, and timing. It's all of those other things. So it gives you the ability to go, hey, look, I've hedged my bets by making it an 8-to-1 motor or a 7.5-to-1 motor. Here's the problem with that. When you do that, you dramatically reduce both power at any given boost level and response, because both of those are bad. Lower compression is going to reduce the power output of the NA motor. And more than anything else, that's what determines how responsive your turbo will be on your combination. It's a function of the NA power, especially down low. That's what's going to spool the turbo up. It's how much power and torque you're making down there. That's what'll do it. And it also lowers your naturally aspirated power everywhere. So if you go from 10-to-1 down to 8-to-1, you're going to lose about 7 or 8% of power. And so if you lose that, if you go from 200 horsepower to 180 horsepower, let's say, I didn't do the math, but if you did that, now when you add boost to that, you're adding boost and multiplying the 180 instead of the 200. And so any number that you multiply it by, so at 10 pounds of boost, you're still going to be making a lot less power starting with 180 and running 10 pounds than you would at 200 and running 10 pounds. And your turbo is going to be less responsive. Not really a problem if you have a small turbo to begin with and you're not trying to make a ton of power, but this will come into play. The bigger the turbo is and the more power you're trying to make, the more response thing becomes an issue. And so the more the lower compression becomes an issue with reducing power and reducing boost response. So you have to play that game, and it's very important. But the thing is, my point is, and that's why this is a turbo myth, is it required? And it's not. And we see that all the time. You see guys running 9, 10-to-1 motors with boost, driving them around, even heavy trucks and stuff, with turbos, daily drivers, on pump gas. You just have to make sure that your tune is right. And then more than anything, it's timing. But obviously, you don't want to run it at 14-to-1 unless you're cruising. But at wide open throttle, the air fuel has to be right. And you can hedge that a little bit by making it a little bit richer. And then if you take the timing away so that you don't get detonation, and like I said, all the other things, have cold air, have an intercooler, do what you can with octane if you can. I don't recommend trying to run, a lot of guys want everything. Well, can I run it on 87? No, you shouldn't even be talking to me. I shouldn't be talking to you because you shouldn't be telling me that you want a turbo motor and you want to run 87 octane. Those things don't go together. At least they don't for me. So you shouldn't be doing that. You don't deserve to have a turbo because you want to run an 87. If you want to run an 87, have a naturally aspirated truck like I have. Then we could talk about running on 87 because I do that. But I don't do that with a turbo motor. And I say that, and I have done that on my supercharged Mustang. I have put 87 in it. But because I knew I was going to drive around and never go into boost. And when I say never go into boost, I mean that I wouldn't go into boost because I had 87 in it. I wouldn't want to hurt it because I knew that it could. So I could actually stay out of boost. 32 Nomad question, which is better for a 4-valve or 6-liter 6765 or a GT45? I was looking at 7875, but I have a single 67 millimeter currently, but it seems restrictive. The turbo choice always depends on what your goal is. So it depends on what you're starting with and then what you want to end with. Do you have a bone stock 4-valve 4.6 liter that makes 300 horsepower? Or do you have one that makes 400 because it has compression and cams and ported head or whatever? Whatever you're starting with is going to dictate how much boost is required to get to where you want to go. A 6765 is not going to make probably as much power, unless it's a really good one, as much as a GT45, because the GT45 is going to be like a 69 or 70 millimeter turbo. So it's going to be a 700 to 750 horsepower on that 4-valve 4.6. A 7875 is like a 1,000 horsepower turbo. How much power do you want to make? The 7875 is going to be certainly have more turbo lag than the GT45 or the 67. So which one, what things do you want most? Do you want response most, and then you're limited by at 5 or 6 or 700 RPM? Or do you want like 1,000 horsepower and you're like, okay, well, I'll always make sure that I'm in the right gear, or that I load it at the line, or that I drag race it. So all those things you have to decide what it is, what combination of things that you want. And I talked about that in the video, where it's not just like I want to put a turbo on there and I want 1,000 horsepower. Well, do you? Like, how often are you using the 1,000 horsepower? Could you go down to a 700 horsepower turbo and then have all of this part of the curve where most of the fun happens and most of the daily driving and where you're using it 90% of the time? Or do you want the 1,000 horsepower thing because you want to say you have a 1,000 horsepower motor and you actually take it to the track where you can put down the 1,000 horsepower? Which one of those things do you want? And then that will determine which turbo to use. Richard, you mean you never just want to hear that super cool pinging sound while it's feathering the throttle back and forth in and out of boost? Yeah, the rattling. It just gives me chills. I remember being down at Powertrain Dynamics and the guy brought his car in, and the first time that they just rolled into the throttle, the thing was rattling itself to death. I'm like, whoa, 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 stop. And the guy that owned the car said, no, don't worry about it. I've been driving around like that forever, for months. I'm like, you can hear that from inside the car and you're still like staying in throttle? Yeah, it's fine. I'm like, oh, you're going to be rebuilding your motor before too long here. That's not good. Audible detonation is not good. And then staying in it during audible detonation is like way worse, and you should be taken out and given an adjustment for something like that. That's terrible. So those are some of the myths. And the problem is that when we talk about those kinds of myths, it usually requires some kind of detailed explanation, like with the static compression. Do you need it? Well, yes and no. It can help, but also it can hurt. And so what are the situations where both of those things happen? And we have to discuss those. And that's the way that it is with all of these myths, because the myth wouldn't be perpetuated if there wasn't like at least a kernel of truth behind it. There has to be something there, and there are other ones. So I'm kind of curious to hear about what you guys think on your myths. So I'm gonna scroll back here and see what people have. Jimmy, of course, I catch a live feed, but I have to go to bed. It does come early. Mexico's in the house. Mexico City. Let's scroll back here and see what we got going on. Man, I'm going all the way back to the beginning. Octane, no intercooler. Texas is in the house. Bigger is better. Back pressure, the best turbo cam. Turbo cam is actually one of the 5 things that I talked about in the video. M&H turbo boat, stock compression 10-1. See, that's the thing. They do work. Yeah, compression is definitely a myth. BW is here. Richard, if you're not running a stall, you might do well with a truck Norris from Brian Tooley. On what? Not on my truck. There's really too much trouble on the street to run an air to water. I ran an air to water in the Chevy Sprint Turbo, and it worked much better than the air to air did. You can build a refrigeration system, but it's not worth it on the street. turbo air-cooled VWs, you don't run more than 7.5 to 1 because they'll overheat. Yeah. The air-cooled stuff is kind of an exception. I've been told on the street you want 9 to 1 for better throttle response and low to moderate boost. That works, and again, it depends on what you want. Do you want the big charge at the end, or do you want the good combination of stuff? Porsche even changed the alloy in the heads to help the 930s control the heat, because they were running our 350 alloy in the 930 instead of the Y alloy in the NA engines, and they were running long before they introduced, or at least a few years anyway, before they introduced the 930 and the Turbo Carrera deal. They were running that 2.1 turbo in racing for quite a while before they introduced these street motors. So they had a lot of experience with it. Blake loved the myth debunking. It's all in the tune. The tune is critical on all of these things. Can you tell if I should go the 331 turbo or higher rev NA, or 347 turbo or higher rev NA? What is the best option for a good price? 500 horsepower is a 500 horsepower 331 or 347 NA is going to be a fairly good sized camshaft and not terribly streetable. The nice thing about 500 horsepower with a 331 turbo, or actually, if you're going to do 500 horsepower, you can do it with a 302. But a 331 or a 347 with a turbo is still going to be a nice driver. And more than likely, you're going to have trouble only making 500. It's probably going to be more like 600. Carla, for those that remember, I took the time to gap the rings on my replacement K24A2. They were 12 thousandths on the top ring. That's pretty tight. I'm glad you did it. Yeah, that's a good idea. Somebody's saying it makes boosts compression. You can cool down. Okay. For a 3.4 inch bore, it went to 22 thousandths. Yeah, 6.5 to 7 thousandths per inch of bore is a good amount. Socrates, I read on some forum a thread where they said you are octane limited. You could get more power with lower compression than on higher compression. That would take a really intricate test to actually find out. It would take you running on the knock sensor. It would take a detonation threshold test, which is difficult to do. It might be easier to do in the car actually. But the comparison is what makes more power on a given octane. Let's say you had 91. Can you get more from running lower static compression and then more boost and or more timing than you can from higher compression and then whatever resulting combination of boost and timing you could run on the higher compression? That would be an interesting thing. Yeah, Bill, I agree that all of these new modern motors, that the technology's come a long way to make that stuff much safer. What's the most boost you can run on 92 octane? There isn't an answer to that because it depends. It depends on what your air temperature is, what your what the chamber design is, whether you've softened the chamber, where the piston is in the hole, what the charge temperature. I mean, it depends on a lot of things. If you on 92 octane, you could run 30 pounds if you could get the air temperature down to like a negative number. Colder plugs is another thing, although I think colder plugs are fairly low on the list of things that create problems and or opportunities. Can you run a turbo on a 12 to 1 with the 85? Yes, you can. That's been done a lot. Tightening up the plug gap is good. It's not, that's less of a detonation thing than it is of making life easier on your ignition system and making sure that it fires. putting boost on my BMW M54, 10.2 to 1. E85 changed the game for pump gas turbo cars. That's true. It is a pump gas deal, and that's why it's so good. I mean, you can run lots of power on these. Pro Street, Richard, I have an L98. It makes 360 kilowatts. At the tires, we're all 60, 78, 75 T4. Makes 840 pounds at 5,000. Max power at 5,000. 232, 240 cam at 50. 630. Does fall over at 5,100. You need to let me know a couple things. One, I need to know what intake manifold you have on there. I need to know what the air, fuel, and timing are at 5,000 or past 5,000, and then I need to know what the boost curve looks like. Is the boost curve rising or is it falling? I suspect that it's falling. James, your turbo TBS made 837 wheel horsepower and E. That's nice. What turbo was that? Any news on the Trophy 4 cylinder? Yes, I did talk to the gentleman that's doing the machining and talked to him today. And what we're trying to do, I have a meeting on Thursday to talk to, I think, the people at SCAT about, we need to put, we're talking about putting rods and pistons in it. We use the crank that's there. We could turn the crank and use different, different size big ends for the rods. But I don't really want to do that. I'd like to see if there are rods available, a rod and a piston combination. We're going to go to a 400 piston, probably a flat top with valve reliefs. Why can newer engines run high compression and low octane like EcoBoost? They have real sophisticated knock sensors. Normally they would be 4-valve motors too, and then they adjust timing on the fly. It's all good stuff. Ozarks, I just jumped in. What are you guys about? My daily is a 17.5 to 1 compression and it's boosted. I'm guessing a diesel. 10.5 to 1 on 13 pounds. That's good. And direct injection, yeah, that would probably. Water vapor injection, all that's good too. Improved combustion chamber designs, yes, that minimize detonation. Although the other thing that they've done is when they improve the combustion chamber design, they also have it also reduces the required timing. So timing numbers are down too. All the drift guys love having the turbo right behind the intercooler, and I always wondered why even have the intercooler if you're just using it to heat up the intake temperature. All drift guys love having the turbo. Oh, right. Oh, right behind the intercooler. Right behind the radiator, do you mean? The direct injected motor also doesn't have time for detonation because it's not injecting fuel in it until the last second. How about an 88 millimeter turbo at 14 pounds makes more than a 66 millimeter turbo at 14 pounds? As long as you're testing it at the level where 6 or 14 pounds from a 66 millimeter turbo, does the 66 millimeter turbo have enough flow to support that flow level at that boost? So if you're trying to test a 1,000 horsepower motor, like you have a 500 horsepower NA, and you're running 14 pounds from a 66 millimeter turbo, it's not going to do very well. In fact, it probably will not make 14 pounds. It won't support that boost level. So that test would have to be done at a power level where both of them could actually support 14 pounds. The people think that the bigger turbo, because it's a bigger turbo, will make more power at that same boost level because it's bigger. And what the reality is that it will support more power because it's bigger. And so on a bigger motor and it's making 14 pounds, it can make more power, but it's a function of what the NA power was. a 66 millimeter turbo and an 85 millimeter turbo, you wouldn't run 14 pounds from both of those on the same motor because you'd get dramatically different power outputs. If you had an 85 millimeter turbo, let's say that you ran both of those at 14 pounds on a K24, I would bet that the numbers would be really, really comparable. Just saying, sick of Ford, but I love the channel. I don't know why you're tired of Ford. This channel isn't dedicated to Fords. Todd, we're not talking about you. Rich, are you talking about me again? I don't have a backflow pressure. I'm not sure what mine's only putting out 3 pounds of boost at 6,700. I have to look into it. I sent you a list of all the things that you should check. So I gave you a list of all the things to take a look at. It's got to be a boost leak. It could be back pressure, the wastegate's opening. All of these things are possibilities. Dude, I don't know who that's directed toward. I'm thinking it's one of the other guys making a comment, I would guess. Yeah, Todd's in the house. Nomad, you don't have to keep giving me money. Never mind. I'm scrolling down. That's still you. That's the same one. I run 87 my 07 Silverado. I do it. Mine's an 02. So now I'm getting back down to kind of where we were. Just join, so ignore this if you've answered already. I've got an 11.1 compression, 430 wheel horsepower NA, no 85 available. Is it realistic to shoot for 800 on 91? Probably not. I actually tune it on 87, makes slightly more power and gets better mileage. Makes more power on 87 than what? Please don't tell me that it makes more power on 87 than it does on 91, because that's not real. I run a 7668 on K24. 7875 is a big. A 7875 is like 1,000 horsepower turbo. You can put it on lots of different stuff, but a 87 octane works fine in these turbo cars if you're driving them around. I mean, if you're not running under boost and stuff, it works fine. Sound of fuel economy. Yeah, because if you're pinging his power, as we all know, right? Let's see. Mike, but you wouldn't run an 85 at 14 pounds on a 2JZ. That was my point. Would you rather have higher compression and less cylinder head flow, or lower compression and more flow? Example would 706 heads versus ported 799 heads. But you're not talking about a big change in static compression between a 706 and a 799 head. The ones that we measured were 2.5 cc's. you probably wouldn't ever even feel that change in static compression. So you just be getting more head flow, especially if it was ported. If it was ported, I would definitely choose ported 799 heads over 706 over stock 706 heads. $28 isn't terrible. If it's a gap issue, you should blow by on both sides. 28,000 is fine for gap. How do you measure charge temperature? We put a Type K thermocouple in the inlet track. Flathead. I've never run a flathead on the engine dyno. I think that they have at Westech, but I've never done it. Richard loves 305s more than Coyotes. I do like Coyotes. If you would venture back to me to the 2010 range, it was right at the end of 2010 and early 2011. I did a whole series on Coyotes. 416 headed 305s. .230 inline 6-cylinder. I have a 292, but not a 230. Do you have any plans to do a video on FE Ford? I do. I have access to one, so I'm hoping to be able to run it. Better gas mileage on 87. I'd be surprised if that happened either. I have an LSA, and Rich really covered it, but he probably didn't get the memo from you. I haven't run LSA testing because I don't have one, but I've run plenty of positive displacement boosted LS stuff, and it's the same. It does the same thing. Hot Rod, love the GLHS stuff. Me too. I can't wait till that car is finished and driving around. I found 7875s with a 0.81 AR on the hot side, perfect for twins. The two 7875s that I have are pretty tight ARs because they were supplied by the guys at LJMS way back in the day, and they were designed as twins. Now I don't remember what the AR is, what the hot sides are on those things. I haven't found, Mike, I haven't found 7875s to be, at least the VS Racing ones that I have, to be 1,300 wheel horsepower capable. VS Racing is mirror. I know the mirror image ones are cool. That's why I like Tom Nelson's stuff so much. I mean, the guys from Nelson Racing do fantastic work. Larry, we do need a poll, right? Jason, you need to put a Kenny Bell booster pump on your Volt. You do a big block Oldsmobile. I'd like to do a 455 Olds. That would be cool. When are we getting more L28 content? I haven't run that yet. We haven't set it up for the dyno. Tommy, a VS88 will be fine on a 408 at 11 or 11 to 1. I don't have the head back from David Bizard on the 2.2 yet. Uh, 10.5 to 11 to 1 on 93 is on a 5 liter is with that cam. What size? Oh, it's a 306. At least that will be better, because at least the camshaft is relatively bigger on the 306. You should be able to make 500 wheel horsepower. Mike, did you see my question about more overlap equals less back pressure? I don't think it's that simple. I don't think those are the two things that are related. Actually, if you have more overlap, you're more apt to make more torque, which is actually going to produce more power under boost, which is actually going to increase back pressure. So the answer is it depends. Building a twin turbo boat motor and likely be 15 to 20 pounds. See, a 5-pound spread worries me because that's a lot of power for much longer than a typical quarter mile. Then you should run less boost and make sure that everything is cooled very well for running in a boat, because you may be flat out for a long time. Have you ever thought about doing J-Series stuff? Yes, I do like if you're talking about J-Series Honda stuff, I do like that. I've been working with my buddy Jimmy, who J-Series swapped his NSX, and we've been doing a lot of stuff together. And I look at them every time I go to the dyno or go to the wrecking yard by the dyno, and I will run one of those on the engine dyno. Karlov, why don't you put good gas in it and then try it on good gas and see what happens? Since you got your K24 gapped and running great on 12 to 14 pounds right now, multiple passes, 202 to 208. I'm thinking that's cranking compression on all four. Tune is on point. Should I try to push 16 to 18 pounds on 94 octane? I do it first on higher octane stuff and then see how it responds. And then I would lower the octane and the timing. Quad 4, I like that. Have you built a supercharged 472 Cadillac? No, I have not done that. I have run a turbo on a 500 Cadillac, though. I was at a mirror image VS Racing 6762s. That would be good on an L33. That'd be a good combination. How are copper plugs like auto lights on LSs? I don't know if I've run the auto lights on there. Eric, you want a North Star? Roman, is there a downside to running a T4 hot side? No, I would run a T4 for the 1,000 horsepower range. Alexander, can you put an MSD Atomic Air Force intake on a Gen 5 L83 truck motor? Yes, you can, but what you'll end up doing is losing a bunch of low-speed power. So we need a poll, I guess. Okay, so the question for today is, will a 7875 turbo make more power on a 200 horsepower 3-liter 2JZ than a 400 horsepower 6-liter LQ4? Now there is a poll. We've got lots of people here, so everybody answer. So other turbo myths. Let me see my list here. Oh, one of the good ones about Turbo-Mist is twin turbos. Two small turbos are a lot more responsive than one single turbo. Just, it's just kind of silliness. How hard is it to get 350 horsepower from a 2.3 turbo Lima? It's not hard. That's just boost. Yeah, I was looking at someone mentioned the grid for the electric motors for electric vehicles, and I was looking at the notifications that we get that it's too hot. Everyone's using their air conditioning, so they'll be rolling blackouts or whatever. I'm like, what's going to happen if everybody actually did get Priuses and stuff? That would be worse. Have you tested gapless rings? I ran gapless rings on my Engine Masters motor, but it was an NA one. But I haven't done a back-to-back test on it. Is that a percent number on the poll? No, there's no percentage. Will a 78, 75 turbo make more power on a 200 horsepower 3-liter 2JZ than on a 400 horsepower 6-liter LQ4? It's self-explanatory. Any tips on spooling a rear mount S475 to get full boost under 3,000? Yeah, you need to have a lot of motor to do that. You need to have a lot of low speed power. You can make the pipe smaller, maybe coat them, but a bigger, more powerful, more torquey, naturally aspirated motor is a good way to do it. Yeah, 14 pounds is good stuff. More power is the question. Which one of them makes more power with that turbo? I don't know how to make more power any more obvious. More power. Which one of them makes the most power? Is ring flutter for too small a second ring gap a myth or no? I don't think it is a myth, but you want ring gap on the second ring also. Twin GT45 is better than one big turbo for all-out drag racing. No, not necessarily, because it depends on how much power you want to make. Just pick the turbo or turbos for how much ever power you want to make. Twin GT45s would support like 1,500 horsepower or more. Is that where you want to be? They'll do that. But you also have one big turbo that will also do that, and they have turbos that will do more than that. So pick the one that you want, and or the ones that you want for the power output that you want. That's the important thing. Compound turbo setup using a 7875 and a 7675. Which one comes first? Those are not the two turbos you should be doing a compound setup on. One of them should be smaller than that, or one of them should be bigger than that. Is there an I don't know button on the survey? Yeah, just guess. It's not the end of the world. Nobody knows what you said. Nobody knows how you voted. What would you say is the horsepower limit of ported stock LS3 heads? I don't know what you mean by that. Like in boosted form or in NA form? We've made almost 700 with stock LS3 heads. So it's way beyond that. And then under boost, there's no limit. The 2JZ is magical. That's true. Casey, it's the most power. Which one makes the most power? Who makes more? Like, which one has a bigger number? There's no boost limit. There's no any limit. Which one makes more power? I think 30 quarts of oil would cause more than ring flutter. I think it'll cause hydrolock. And it'll cause what we call reverse hydrolock. Actually, it won't be reverse hydrolock in that case, because everything will be basically bathed. I'm building a 6-liter LQ4. I want to make 500 horsepower to the wheels. What cam should I get? It's going to require more than a cam to get to 500 at the wheels on the 6-liter. It's going to require a lot of stuff, or boost. Is there plans for the David Vizard head on the GLH? No, that's a bathtub head, and the one on the GLH is a 782, a swirl head. So the Vizard head will be tested on something else, on one of the engines on the engine dial. Survey is a trick question. It's really not. It's actually very, very simple. Yeah, I guess you could put a different size oil pan on there. Any updates on the 3800? I'm still waiting for Turbo Monza on the cylinder head. Single cab. The cam that you have to put to make that kind of power is really big. So it's basically going to be whatever fits in the available piston to valve clearance. I'm assuming, because you're wanting to do that you're putting a piston in it. You're putting a piston in it that has valve reliefs in it, so that you can put more camshaft in it. If that's the case, then you can put a lot of camshaft in it. But it takes a ported head, a camshaft, fairly decent compression, like a flat top piston, and a good intake manifold to get to that kind of number. Or at least it has for me. I made 800 wheel horsepower on 20 pounds. That seems not right to me. On a 2JZ. That seems like 1.5. So that would mean that your NA motor, your NA 3-liter is making over 300 horsepower. It seems like a lot. I drove a 2.8-liter S10, knocking bad, 30 miles home. Ten quarts of oil are bad. Well, I've done that actually before. We've got a motor from one of the used like Honda JDM places, and it was my buddy Harold. We're putting it in. It was either an early Civic or an Accord, and we put it in and filled it up full of oil. and went to run it, and it just ran terrible. And then we realized that it already had oil in it, and then we'd put oil in it, and so it was basically all the way up to the valve cover, which is not good. How much power do you think a stock bottom end 3800 Series 2 can safely make? I don't know. We're going to put ring gap in the one that I have, and you know, a 6466. I would think that a Series 2 would be able to max out that turbo. Any plans to Big Bang a Gen 6 454? Yes. What is the most boost you can run with no ring gap? I don't know. It depends on how long you run it for. And if you don't know what the ring gap is the ring gap 5 or 10 or 15 or 25? Maybe you can run a lot. Maybe you can't run any. You just don't know. That's the problem. But you can run more than 6 pounds on everything that I've ever seen. My stock Camscape 24 makes 500 wheel horsepower and 18 pounds. Uh, 3 liter at 300 horsepower isn't that much these days. 100 horsepower per liter is stock horsepower engine territory now. It is, but not on a 2J. 2J doesn't make anywhere near that stock. I've never boosted a BMW engine. I've never not run one on the engine dyno ever. Because I said 4.8. 4.8 actually would have a better chance than the 6 liter would, if that gives you any idea of what what your answer should be on the poll. What size servo for a Pontiac 455? 6X heads, 236, 220, 244. Maximum horsepower 600. Your 455 is going to be making 500, I would think, anyway, right? With that kind of camshaft, and are the heads ported? Yeah, I mean, 100 horsepower per liter is, if you had a VTEC Honda, that was stock. It was a 1.6 liter, had 100 horsepower per liter, and the Type R stuff had more than that. 195 horsepower from a 1.8, or 100 and was it 185 on the V16B? On the Civic Type R was 185 from 1.6 liter, so that's pretty good. But those are the exceptions and not the rule. And especially when the production 2JZ would have been a low compression motor, that motor would have made less than the NA motor, which I think was rated at 200 or 220 or 230 or something. And the thing with 2Js is I just don't see guys doing lots of stuff to make the thing better NA. Like, very rarely do they put more compression in it, which I would do. Porting the head would be really good. Cams would be really good. They stick those small short runner intake manifolds on them, but mostly they do lots and lots of boost with good turbos and stuff. Can you do a test on a GM 3.4 liter? Those are, I've never run one of those, or the 3.5. Can you turbo 328 BMW? Yes. Although what I would do in that is a 328. I would like to do a 528. I was talking to my buddy Jimmy about that. One of the old 528s, and make it look like an M5, and but put a, take the 528E motor out of there and put something good in there. Do I really need a boost controller or fancy aftermarket computer? You need to be able to have the right air fuel and the right timing. Can you get that from something else besides you're gonna have to get at least a good tune on your factory computer. Will you make a video on how to use a compressor map? Yeah, I've been wanting to do compressor map video for a really long time now, basically to show you why people don't really use compressor maps. But there's a lot of good information, and a compressor map is actually where the Holdner power boost formula comes from. It comes from the map, basically. BorgWarner MatchBot, that's another good place where you can get lots of information there. I'm running a 7875 on my stroke Pontiac 400, 21 pounds on E85. I'm at 940 horsepower. That's a lot. The compressor map deciphering question. It is good, and I can show you how to get the right intersection of where you're at. But the thing that's really critical for compressor map stuff, and this is what a lot of people don't tell you, is it's much more effective if you know the naturally aspirated power output of your motor. If you know that, then you can position yourself with that turbo correctly on the map. If not, you're just speculating. I did a 6-liter Sleed 427. I'm so tempted to put these ported LS3 heads, 88 millimeter, but I think I may be shorting myself. If Jason, you should not be worried about cylinder heads on a turbo combination, especially for 1400 horsepower. Ported LS3 heads, like I said, flow enough to make way over 700 horsepower naturally aspirated, meaning that you could make 1400 horsepower if you had the rest of the motor at very low boost. If that 88 millimeter turbo will support 1400 horsepower, those heads will easily do that, and they're not going to be holding you back whatsoever. $232 horsepower from a 2-liter S200. Are you talking about an S2000 maybe? Then it was 250 horsepower. Man, I want to buy a Yugo. You don't hear that an awful lot. A lot of people are starting to turbo the NA2JZs. I think that's a good idea. You find lots and lots of those. I mean, how many super motors are you going to really find? And if you do, they're like real money. And a Supra obviously is real money too. K-Swap Yugo, V12 Yugo. Everybody go on the Yugo thing. I remember learning compressor maps, studying turbochargers by Hugh McGinns. I had Hugh's book up here. It's just read it lots and lots of times. Can you make a surge zone video? Well, if we did a compressor map video, then the surge would be on there. Can you make a surge zone video, Richard, like a turbo size that's ready to die at a 2.2 liter? Yeah, there would be lots of them on that because it's just not a very efficient motor. So if you try to put a really big one on there, you're going to get into surge. Stop doing K swaps. No, the K series and now I think the J series also are kind of the LS swaps of the import world. Running 1970 013s. I was debating on putting 6Xs back on, but as long as I get E85, I'll keep them. Aluminum is a possibility. What size turbo for a 1915 cc VW, 250 to 300 horsepower? That's going to be a T3. I think 300 horsepower on those. Actually, for a wrecking yard deal, I think I would have used the SVO turbo one. Manuel, I don't know what size turbo you want for your built 6.4 Hemi because I don't know what the power output is. You just need to tell me what kind of power you want. Do you ever dabble in diesel engines? I had a 5.9 Cummins. I think my Dodge Ram was in 2008 or something, but only chassis dyno stuff, not on the engine dyno. Pontiac had a little turbo thing. Yeah, the Sunfires they did. Do a wiggly finger demonstration. that took a lot for them to build that. Pontiac had a turbo 3.1. Compressor shorts can get scary in real applications. Yeah, you don't want it. And it sounds terrible. Everything sounds like it's coming apart. What Chinese turbos do you recommend? I've had good luck with max speeding stuff. I'd have good luck with CX racing stuff, with DNA stuff. I've had pretty good luck with all the things I've tried from the internet. Things like air density, altitude, and NA power all need to be factored in when you're reading compressor maps. You need to know, I mean, you need to at least know what the NA power output is, because otherwise you don't know what your power output, which is going to be airflow along the bottom, what your airflow need and power output is going to be at any given boost level. You don't know that unless you know the NA power. L33, 5.3, stage 2 or 3, sloppy cam. The stage 3, by the way, won't fit in stock piston to valve clearance. Ring gap intake, 102 millimeter throttle body, Decas, twin HX35s. Well, you could easily top out the HX35s, but you won't do it with a sloppy stage 3 cam if it's a stock bottom end. And I hope you put ring gap in it. 102 millimeter throttle body doesn't do anything. I don't know what intake that is. Is it a stock intake? Any upgrades on Gen 3 5.7 Hemi engine? Yeah, I have lots of videos up on Gen 3 5.7 Hemi stuff. I wrote a book on it, and there's lots of videos up on Hemis. VS Racing turbos. Yeah, and VS, Viron stuff has all been good. I'd like a clear explanation of turbine maps. That don't think I've seen a lot of that. Boosted. I have the same DNA GT45 that you've tested many times. It's a bit lazy to spool on my twin charge 2.5 liter. How much power are you trying to make? I don't know that that would be my turbo choice for a what 2.5 motor is it? It's not a. It worked fairly well on the on a K24, but that's a pretty powerful NA motor. If you own a factory car with a turbo, the owner's manual tells you to let it idle for 3 minutes to let the turbo cool off. Once it's sit for 3 minutes. That's why they used to sell those turbo timers that you could put in a programmed amount of time where it'd sit and then it would shut the car off. Matt, that's right. It has to be low compression. Yeah, so overbuilt. Somebody ran leather bearings in their 350. Speaking of 350s, I'm going over to pick up a Pontiac 350 here in a day or so. Small block Chevy, steel crank, aluminum rods, 12-to-1, Brodix head, single plane intake, port injection, Holley HP, solid roller, coil per cylinder on 85. Will it take 14 pounds of boost? Yes, it will. On good gas, on the 85, yeah, that will be fine. I don't know what the specs are on the cam because we don't know if it's a roller, if it's a turbo cam. With all of that, I'm thinking it's going to be something that's a fairly tight LSA and pretty sporty on the lift and duration, I would imagine. But if all of that's doing what it's 355, so let's say that it's 550 or 600 horsepower or something like that. 14 pounds. I don't know why you pick a boost rating, but let's say we wanted to double the power output. You're going to need like an S480 or S485 kind of size turbo for that. Grady turbo timers, yeah, and I think HKS had them also. There probably were other people. 600 horsepower, street driven, 300 Ford. It'd take a little bit of work, and it would be much better if you're driving it on E85. Mexico City's in the house. I think we did. I think we went over that, right? Deck 80s won't be enough for 85 or even 700 horsepower on gasoline. We can make a lot more than 700 horsepower on gas on 80s. If it's a, I'm assuming that it's a V8. How close does your turbo need? How close to your turbo does your wastegate need to be on a remote mount turbo for a stock Crown Victoria? The car doesn't matter. Where is it you want to mount your wastegate? You mount your wastegate close to your exhaust. It's a Subaru STI engine built with ring gap and an Eaton M90. An M90 on that motor should be fairly responsive, I would think. 600 to 700 wheel horsepower. Oh, okay, then that's right in that range then. After seeing the twin setup on Calvin Z car, I'm tempted to put twins on my BMW. Setup looks really cool. It does. They do look cool twins, which is why I wanted to put twins on the Z motor also. Oh, Chinese intake on and fuel rails, but Buddy has sloppy stage 2. He likes that, so I might go with it. The cam will work. I mean, you could put almost any camshaft in there and top those turbos out. That camshaft's not great for idle quality and stuff, but it will work in terms of power. In your pull, a 6-liter will spool quicker because of torque. Yeah, but that's not the question in the pull. But yeah, a bigger motor would be, any size turbo will be more responsive on a bigger motor. When you say turbo cam, is that a cam with short duration or a big duration cam? It's a turbo specific cam. The turbo cams, they have different stages of turbo cams, so you can have either of those things, but you don't need a turbo specific camshaft. On past Let's Talk, you mentioned I could probably get 500 horsepower on a stock K24 on 94 pump. How can I do that without pushing past 14 psi? What does the motor make NA? On the turbo by the back axle. Why are you trying to do that? I'm currently working on an 81 F250 clone right now. We've got an HX35 and a modified exhaust valve with a 1-barrel Edelbrock intake that's been modified for a blow-through Holley 2-barrel. And you're trying, I hope that you're not trying, were you trying to do 600 horsepower with that combination? Was that the same guy? having lobes on the cam makes it a turbo cam. Yes, they all are turbo cams. Trigger, I want to see if FE heads will work to chop up for my 300. That's not the ones I would pick. I would pick Boss heads or LS heads for a 300. Roman, letting the car idle for a period of time after you've run it under boost helps the turbo and the oil cool off. Dan, I don't know about turbo kits. I haven't tested actual kits on the dyno. Justin, I think you already answered your own question. What is your opinion on an LT4 blower on a 427 L8T? It's the blower might be undersized for what you're doing. Maybe you can spin it up a little bit and it will work for low speed power and mid-range power. But ultimately, that blower is going to be the limiting factor of that combination. When you think a trunnion kit is needed for an LS, what I think about when I think about trunnion kits, I usually think about how long the rocker has been in existence. And so if we get motors from the wrecking yard and they have 300,000 or 400,000 miles on them, a trunnion upgrade is a good idea just because the rocker has probably had it. Eddie, your 408, I don't know because you didn't give me the duration of the camshaft. The lift tells me really nothing about it, although it tells me that you have a whole bunch of lift, probably more than you need, unless you have LS7 heads on it or something. I know, look at the time. It's time for me to go. Will a 7875 turbo make more power on a 200 horsepower 3-liter 2JZ than a 400 horsepower 6-liter? The answer is actually yes. Because what will happen is on a 6-liter on a turbo like that, you're going to get into a back pressure situation with the bigger motor on the bigger motor way before you do on the smaller motor. So if you just keep turning the boost up, we're assuming an awful lot here that the 7875 is going to want to run at the pressure ratio required on a 2JZ to make more power. But ultimately, the smaller motors on the same size turbo can typically make more power than the bigger motors can because, and again, there's a lot of things going on there, but because the bigger motor, especially a 6-liter, tends to run into back pressure problems before it runs into a flow problem on the cold side. L83 does have coolant drains on the side of the block. Thank you guys all for showing up. It is time to go. It's been a long time. Again, thank you guys all for showing up, and I will see you guys all tomorrow.